Rights of the People by A.T. Jones, Part 2, Chapter 2. How the United States Became a Nation. When the fathers of '76 had declared that, quote, these colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, close quote, Britain did not agree with the proposition, and consequently it had to be proved. In the war from 1776 to 1783, the proposition was so fully demonstrated that Britain and all other nations admitted its entire truthfulness. No sooner was this question settled, however, than dangers unrealized until now threatened the very existence not only of the union of the 13 states, but of the separate states themselves. When the question had been settled that these colonies were and of right ought to be free and independent states, then free and independent states was precisely what they were. There were 13 of them, and each one of the 13 was as entirely free and independent of all the others as were the whole 13 free and independent of Great Britain. Each of the 13 states was as free and independent of any or all of the others as though it stood alone on this continent. True, Articles of Confederation had been entered into under which a Congress acted, but the Congress had no real power. It could recommend to the states measures to be carried into effect, but the states could and did do just as they pleased as to paying any attention to the recommendations. If the measure suited them, they would act upon it. But if not, they would not. And if it suited part of them and did not suit the rest, even if it met the approval of all but one, only the ones that chose would comply with the recommendation, and as to the others, or the other one, there was no power on earth that could require them or it to act with the states that chose to comply. Washington described the situation by saying, quote, we are one nation today and 13 tomorrow, close quote. This is the exact truth. Practically, they were 13 independent nations, just as those of Europe are. It was soon found that they could not long exist with such a fast and loose order of things as that. By their enemies' prophecies were frequent of the, quote, downfall of the United States, close quote, and indeed the signs were so abundant and ominous that their friends were compelled to fear that this would certainly result. As soon as peace with Britain had been settled, Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and other prominent ones began to agitate for a federal government, a national power. Washington, quote, had hardly reached home from the war, close quote, before he and a letter to the governor of Virginia, January 18, 1784, stated the situation and the great need of the country in the following forcible words, quote, the prospect before us is fair. I believe all things will come right at last, but the disinclination of the states to yield competent powers to Congress for the federal government will, if there is not a change in the system, be our downfall as a nation. This is as clear to me as ABC. We have arrived at peace and independency to very little purpose if we cannot conquer our own prejudices. The powers of Europe begin to see this, and our newly acquired friends, the British, are ready and professedly acting upon this ground, and wisely too, if we are determined to persevere in our folly. They know that individual opposition to their measures is futile, and boast that we are not sufficiently united as a nation to give a general one. Is not the indignity of this declaration in the very act of peacemaking and conciliation sufficient to stimulate us to vest adequate powers in the sovereign of these United States? An extension of federal powers would make us one of the most wealthy, happy, respectable, and powerful nations that ever inhabited the terrestrial globe. Without them, the federal powers, we shall soon be everything which is the direct reverse. I predict the worst consequences from a half-starved, limping government, always moving upon crutches and tottering at every step. Close quote. History of the Constitution of the United States, Bancroft, Volume 1, page 153. Nearly the end of the same year, December 14, 1784, the French minister wrote as follows, quote, "The American Confederation has a strong tendency to dissolution. It is well that on this point we have neither obligations to fulfill nor any interest to cherish," close quote, page 167. In November 1785, during a discussion in the General Assembly of Virginia over the question of an extension of power to a federal government, Washington was asked for suggestions, to which, November 30, he replied, quote, "The proposition is self-evident. We are either a united people or we are not so. If the former, let us in all matters of national concern act as a nation which has a national character to support. If the states individually attempt to regulate commerce, an abortion or a many-headed monster will be the issue. If we consider ourselves or wish to be considered by others a united people, why not adopt the measures which are characteristic of it and support the honor and dignity of one? If we are afraid to trust one another under qualified powers, there is an end of the Union." Close quote. The History of the Constitution of the United States, page 251. At the suggestion of the legislature of Maryland to the General Assembly of Virginia, in December 1785, a resolution was passed by that body, January 21st, 1786, quote, proposing that commissioners from all the states should be invited to meet and regulate the restrictions on commerce for the whole, close quote. Madison was the first named of the commissioners of Virginia. Annapolis, Maryland, was named as the place and, quote, the first Monday in September 1786, the time of the meeting. In accepting the invitation, New Jersey empowered her commissioners to consider how far a uniform system in their commercial regulations and other important matters might be necessary to the common interest and permanent harmony of the several states. And these other important matters turned out to be definite instructions to be content with nothing less than a new federal government. History of the Constitution of the United States, pages 257 and 268. In February 1786, the Congress of the Confederation, after having discussed for 2 days the many and increasing difficulties which it was compelled to meet, referred the subject to a committee. After deliberating 5 days, the committee, February 15, made their report. After stating the chief difficulties, the report concluded as follows, quote, after the most solemn deliberation, and under the fullest conviction that the public embarrassments are such as above represented, and that they are daily increasing, the committee are of opinion that it has become the duty of Congress to declare most explicitly that the crisis has arrived when the people of the United States, by whose will and for whose benefit the federal government was instituted, must decide whether they will support their rank as a nation by maintaining the public faith at home and abroad, or whatever, for want of a timely exertion in establishing a general revenue and thereby giving strength to the Confederacy, they will hazard not only the existence of the Union, but of those great and invaluable privileges for which they have so arduously and so honorably contended." Close quote. Yet, after this strong and pointed report, the Congress failed to take any decisive steps toward the relief and safety of the country. Quote, "The discussion brought Congress no nearer to the recommendation of a general convention. Its self-love refused to surrender its functions, least of all on the ground of its own incapacity to discharge them." Close quote. History of the Constitution of the United States, page 259. The effect of this report, however, was such that, quote, "far and wide a general convention was become the subject of thought, and," quote, "a plan for it was forming, though it was as yet immature." Close quote. Commissioners were not present at the Annapolis Convention from all the states, but such as were present unanimously adopted a report to Congress asking that body to use its endeavors to secure a meeting of commissioners from all the states, quote, "to meet at Philadelphia on the second Monday of May, 1787, to consider the situation of the United States," page 268. This recommendation was not adopted by Congress, so that in itself that was the end of this particular effort. Meanwhile, the difficulties and dangers of the country had multiplied, and the impotency of Congress as it then existed to deal with them was becoming more and more apparent. In this crisis, Madison, who had been all along a tireless worker for the new federal government, for a national power which should be really such, stepped boldly forward and appealed to the people of America to take the necessary steps without the lead of Congress. He carried in the General Assembly of Virginia, November 1786, the unanimous endorsement of the recommendation of Annapolis Convention with the following preamble written by himself. Quote, "The commissioners who assembled at Annapolis on the 14th day of September last for the purpose of devising and reporting the means of enabling Congress to provide effectually for the commercial interests of the United States have represented the necessity of extending the revision of the federal system to all its defects, and having recommended that deputies for that purpose be appointed by the several legislators to meet in convention in the city of Philadelphia on the second day of May next, a provision preferable to a discussion of the subject in Congress where it might be too much interrupted by ordinary business, and where it would, besides, be deprived of the counsels of individuals who are restrained from a seat in that assembly. The General Assembly of this Commonwealth, Virginia, taking into view the situation of the Confederacy, as well as reflecting on the alarming representations made from time to time by the United States in Congress, particularly in their act of the 15th day of February last, can no longer doubt that a crisis is arrived at which the people of America are to decide the solemn question whether they will, by wise and magnanimous efforts, reap the fruits of independence and of union, or whether, by giving way to unmanly jealousies and prejudices, or to partial and transitory interests, they will renounce the blessings prepared for them by the Revolution. The same noble and extended policy, and the same fraternal and affectionate sentiments which originally determined the citizens of this Commonwealth to unite with their brethren of the other states in establishing a federal government, cannot but be felt with equal force now as motives to lay aside every inferior consideration and to concur in such further concessions and provisions as may be necessary to secure the objects for which that government was instituted, and to render the United States as happy in peace as they have been glorious in war. Close quote, pages 271 and 272. It was as late as the middle of November 1786 when this was passed by the Virginia Assembly. As soon as New Jersey received the news, she endorsed the action. November 23rd. In December, Pennsylvania joined these two. In January, North Carolina, and in February 1787, Delaware joined the former three. Congress, seeing how the tide was moving, thought it best to move also, and accordingly thought to maintain its dignity by totally ignoring all that had been done and gravely recommending precisely such a convention as was going to meet, and also recommending it to meet in the same place and on the identical day. One after another of the remaining states fell into line, except Rhode Island, which never did. And so only 12 states had any part in the work of the convention that created the national government under which we live. As soon as it became apparent that the convention would certainly assemble, Madison began to prepare an outline of a constitution for the expected new government. And in advance of the federal convention, he had sketched for his own use and that of his friends, and ultimately of the convention, a thoroughly comprehensive constitutional government for the Union. The delegates were slow in arriving, and it was the 29th of May, 1787, before the convention was fully organized for business. The regular business of the convention was begun by Randolph, the governor of Virginia, in these words, quote, "To prevent the fulfillment of the prophecies of the downfall of the United States, it is our duty to inquire into the defects of the Confederation and the requisite properties of the government now to be framed, the danger of the situation, and the remedy." Volume 2 of the History of the Constitution of the United States, page 10. After a few further remarks, he proposed for a working basis for a constitution, the outline that had been drawn by Madison, and to which, with some amendments and alterations, the whole Virginia delegation had agreed. The convention went steadily on with its work, and on September 17, 1787, with the unanimous consent of the representatives of the 11 states present, there was completed and signed the Constitution of the United States as it stands, from the preamble down to amendments. Not all who signed it, however, were satisfied with it. Nevertheless, those who were not entirely favorable to it signed it because it was the only course in which there lay any hope. Though dissatisfied with it, they accepted it in order to escape a much worse fate than anything under it could possibly be. Charles Pinckney of South Carolina said, quote, "I, too, object to the power of a majority of Congress over commerce, but apprehending the danger of a general confusion and an ultimate decision by the sword, I shall give the plan my support." Close quote, page 218. Governor Morris of Pennsylvania remarked, quote, "I too had objections, but considering the present plan the best that can be obtained, I shall take it with all its faults. The moment it goes forth, the great question will be, shall there be a national government or a general anarchy?" Close quote, page 220. Alexander Hamilton signed with the following explanation, quote, No man's ideas are more remote from the plan than my own are known to be. But is it possible to deliberate between anarchy and convulsion on the one side and the chance of good to be expected from the plan on the other side?" Close quote. And after the proposed Constitution had been sent forth to the people for their consideration, Washington sought further to disarm opposition by a letter in which he used the following words, quote, "My decided opinion is that there is no alternative between the adoption of the proceedings of the convention and anarchy. The Constitution or disunion is before us to choose from." Close quote, pages 279 and 280. So well was this situation understood outside of the country, as well as by these leading men in the country, that Great Britain was really considering whether she should not administer upon the estate in the event of the convention failing to come to any agreement upon a plan of government. Quote, "The Ministry of England harbored the thought of a constitutional monarchy with a son of George III as king, and they were not without alarm lest gratitude to France should place on an American throne a prince from the House of Bourbon." Close quote, Volume 1, page 277. Thus, and for these reasons, was the government of the United States created, and thus the United States became a nation. The end of chapter 2.